Uh-oh. Oh, that noise.
That noise. I think it's coming from Dawn. Dawn, I just muted you. It seemed to be coming from you, a rattling noise.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. Dawn, let's, why don't you unmute and let's just see if that's
any better or worse or?
Yeah, it's a weird noise in your background. Try muting your background again.
Okay. Well, if I stop my video, is that any better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It is better, but we want to see you.
Well, I'll mute myself and then turn off the video when I start reading.
Okay. That's so odd. I don't know what that would be.
I'm gonna mute everybody.
So lots of people are coming in. Wow, got a big crowd tonight.
Dory, you're muted, just so you know.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I was talking away. Did anybody else lose their internet connection a bunch of times this week?
Yeah.
It was weird. I guess it was the wind, but it was an iffy week for internet. So I hope, you know, everybody's is back to working well, and we'll just hope for the best. So we'll just give people a couple minutes to arrive, but welcome to those of you who are here. And this is the reading and celebration, such as it is, for the 2021-22 Manuscript Intensive. Actually, I guess it was just 2022, wasn't it? No, I mean, no, we started, sorry, I'm losing my mind. We started in February of 2021, right? And went just about exactly till February of 2022. So it was almost all in 2021 that this group was held virtually. And we had hoped to be in the studio tonight, but we are here instead, for better or worse. And the silver lining is always that so many more people get to join us when we're online. And that's just the weird mixed blessing of what our new reality is. So welcome, everybody. I think there's some people from far and yon here. Basically the way that the evening is going to go, I'll just give you a little rundown, is I'll talk a little bit about the manuscript group just briefly. And then we have our 6 readers who are going to each read short selections from the work that they've been doing over the past year in the group. Everybody in the group is working on a book-length manuscript, and I think everybody in this group finished their draft. Isn't that true, guys? I think everybody in this group finished their draft, and several people went on and made good progress on a second draft. And I think Linda might even be on her 4th draft. So she's like on double time here. But it was an amazingly successful, incredibly inspiring group of writers to work with over this past year. I was so excited to read their installments every time. And the beauty of this work is that we really not only get support and encouragement and feedback on, on writing your draft, but people also tend to get very invested in each other's stories and process. And, so you're really waiting for that next installment of Rita's stuff or Jane's stuff, or, whoever's coming up, you know their story, you get to know their characters. And it's just a really magical thing that happens where, we all are kind of in it together doing this work. So So we're going to celebrate these fantastic 6 writers in this group. And while people are reading, if everybody who has a question, either about what you're hearing, about people's work, about their process, if you could just type those questions into the chat bar as they occur to you, then at the very end, after everybody's read, we'll have a question and answer session, and you can feel free to ask questions about the writing itself that you're hearing, about people's process, or if you have more specific questions about the manuscript group itself and how it works, we're happy to address those. You might have questions, logistical questions, but you might also be curious to ask these writers about their experience in the group and what it was like. So all of that is great, and we're going to make space for it at the end. I started this group, I guess it was about 12 years ago. I desperately, or maybe it was 14 years ago now, because it's been a while. I desperately needed support and structure and feedback for finishing my first book, my novel, Outside the Ordinary World, and I just couldn't finish it. I had been working on it for, longer than I care to admit right now. And I'd been through multiple stages with it, multiple drafts. I'd taken 1,000 pages and thrown it away. I'd started it over, and, I just couldn't get to that last lap. I couldn't get past the finish line. I was struggling with yet one more revision that I knew I had to make, a major overhaul of the book, and I just couldn't see it anymore. And I needed a group of writers to kind of help me through the process. And I couldn't find a group that really fit my needs around the Valley at that time. And so I decided to start one, as I would want to take it. And I became a participant in that first group and did in fact get my book finished along with several other members of the group that year. And that was, I think, back in 2009. So it's been a while. And since then, we've had so many amazing projects come out of this work. It's been incredible. And a good handful have gone on to publication. So that's really exciting. But it's really, just about the process of supporting and holding each other as we do this incredibly difficult work of writing a book, because it's hard. I want to start you with a quote that I really like. I wanted to share this with you about sort of why we do all this in the first place. I love this quote. This is from Norman Fisher. And he says, "Where does this need to splash around in language come from? Is it a disease? I'm not sure, but if so, I don't think we will find the virus. I suppose that the need to write comes from the connection between human consciousness and language making. Language making isn't incidental or ornamental to human consciousness. It is its center, its essence. Years ago, I went to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem and did what all tourists there do, wrote some words on a scrap of paper that I tucked into a crevice in the wall. When I closed my eyes and touched my head to the warm stone, it came to me. All language is prayer. This must be so. Who is it we are speaking to when we speak to anyone? To that person, and also past him or her to out there. If there is language, it means there is the possibility of being heard, being met, being loved, and reaching out to be heard, met, or loved is a holy act. Language is holy." So without too much further ado, I would like to go ahead and start the reading. As I said, each reader, when they're done, will introduce the reader that follows, and that way you don't have to remember everyone's information and names right up front. But I have the pleasure tonight of introducing Marie Lavender. Marie is working on a wonderful memoir. She wrote her first poem at age 7, As an adult, her poems have been published in the Naugatuck River Review, Sage Woman Magazine, and Gaia Magazine. Her memoir and nonfiction in Northeast Magazine, the Hartford Courant, the Orlando Sentinel, and other publications, and her historical nonfiction essays in the Hartford Magazine and the Journal of Farmington History. And I know you will enjoy hearing part of Marie's story. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you, Dory. Okay. I am going to read The Do-Over. Hyperventilating, I clutch a rock in the rapids of Westwater Canyon on the Colorado River in Utah. Grayish Precambrian rock cliffs, eons old, loom on either side of me. I'm alone. How did I get here? Our son Christopher left Connecticut about 8 years ago to become a river guide in Moab. This inspiration was born on a family rafting trip down the Green River when Chris was 14. I endured middle-aged hot flashes in the 100+ degree southern Utah weather, but Chris was in heaven. After the move, missing our son, my husband and I visited him as often as we could. Thus, we found ourselves in the Class 4 rapids of Westwater in 2013. Chris and his friend Lauren, an experienced river guide, led the trip. The rest of the group consisted of our intrepid daughter and another couple with 2 stoked teenage sons. Chris manned the equipment raft with cooking supplies, camping gear, the groover, which is an outdoor toilet, and personal bags, while Lauren commanded us in the paddle boat. To run these rapids required teamwork. We paddled to the commands of the river guide, who sat at the back of the raft yelling, "All forward, all back, right back, left back," or "Stop." During this trip, we shot through all the rapids within the 14-mile stretch of water, including Skull, the second to the last and most technical one. To make it through Skull Rapid, we paddled furiously to avoid the huge boulders in the middle of the river and the Rock of Shock on the right. The main current of the river flowed between these 2 formidable formations, and if we veered too far right of the Rock of Shock, we'd be funneled into the Room of Doom, a powerful whirlpool where sometimes people get trapped and abandon their crafts to hike up the steep cliffs or are rescued. We had shot past the huge boulders, the Rock of Shock and Room of Doom, waves of white water exploding around us. I could finally relax as our paddle boat entered what was informally called Swimmers Rapids. Lauren encouraged us to jump into the water and swim. Everyone was excited, except me. Although Swimmers Rapids were not nearly as turbulent as Skull, they were flowing swiftly with what looked like some small waves. Everyone leapt into the water. Afraid of being the coward, I did too, and immediately got caught under the raft. The waves were a little bigger at eye level. I pushed up on the bow, floated out and away, swinging my feet forward, downstream of my body, while crossing my arms over my chest, the swimmer position. But my body, heavier than the froth, sank, and I swallowed water while being propelled to the left shore. Lauren stood up in the raft, wildly gesticulating and shouting, her words drowned by the noisy river. Afraid she was warning us about some danger lurking there, I panicked. Then her raft shot ahead and she was gone. That's when I swam as hard as I could to the right side of the river and found this rock. Now, clinging to my rock as if my life depends on it, my heart races. I can't catch my breath. The river is trying to pry me away. If I release my grip, I'll be forced into the rapids again. I'm scared. I remember all the times I had to save myself. as a 7-year-old abandoned in deep water before I knew how to swim. I sank to the bottom, but I found I could push off to the surface to breathe and bounced my way to shore. No one noticed my struggle. As an adult, I was blown out into Chesapeake Bay while windsurfing. I could barely see the shore as the strong wind grabbed the sail out of my hands, and I'd fall into the bay laden with jellyfish. Finally, angry at the wind and the jellyfish, and with all my strength, I clenched the boom and made it back to the dock. Now I force my breathing into a calmer rhythm. The ancient rocks on both sides of me emanate a quiet vigilance. Stay in this moment. See where you are. It's not so bad, they seem to say. My exhalation slow and my heartbeat eases a bit. Suddenly, the bow of Chris's yellow raft bobs into view, downriver toward me. He spies me and taps his head, which is the sign for, "Are you all right?" I am to mimic back the same movement to show I'm fine, but instead, I punch my fist in the air, the sign indicating, "No, help, save me." He startles and immediately steers the raft toward me, crashing against the rock, and in a split second, grabbing my life vest, he pulls me right in. "Are you hurt?" He looks at me with alarm. I lie for a moment on my back, panting, and then sit up on the bench. Relief floods my body. "No, I'm okay," I answer him. Chris is very quiet as we ride the rest of Swimmers Rapids. He tells me later that he's upset with me. Turns out the only time you make that sign is when you're hurt, broke, your leg, or bleeding. What about a panic attack? When you're afraid you're going to drown? From then on, Chris uses me as an example of what not to do when he conducts river trip orientation meetings with prospective groups. Sometimes you save yourself, and sometimes you need someone else's help, like your son's. I still feel some shame about my panic attack, but we can laugh about it now. I like to think that Chris was really fearful that I was hurt, and anger felt easier to show than fear. Sometimes when I fall asleep, I relive that moment alone, clutching the rock, and make up different endings. In the do-overs, one ending could be, I never take that jump into the water and cruise the rapids in the raft with Lauren. Or Chris rescues me, and instead of judgment, there is joy and relief at seeing I am not injured. We laugh all the way back to the group. I like this one better. But the one I like best is this. I take a deep breath, jump, and trust, surrendering to the strong current. This time I keep my head way above the water and my mouth closed. I make it through with ease. The rapids gentle, and I float blissfully on my back the rest of the way to rejoin the group. Thank you. So now I'm going to introduce Jane Mortifie. At various times throughout the last 48 years, Jane has made her career as a singer and actress on stage and in film and television, as well as working in the studio doing voiceovers, jingles, and animated series. 15 years ago, at the suggestion of her musical director, to write some tunes for her upcoming album, Jane enrolled in a creative writing course and thus began the writing of her first novel, Out of the Fire, which she self-published in 2018. She says writing is the only thing that comes anywhere close to how she feels when she sings.
Thanks, Marie. And I just want to take a moment to express how deeply grateful I am to Dory and to Emily for offering Writers in Progress on Zoom and for their ongoing support and encouragement. It's what's kept me writing throughout the pandemic. And yeah, I have yet to write a song, by the way, but today I am reading from my second novel, Sarah's life. There's got to be a pony in here somewhere. This is, in there, there is a reference to Teddy, and he is Sarah's brother. Sarah's assistant knocked on her office door. Your new client, Mr. Montgomery's here. Thanks, Emma. Show him in. Thank you for seeing me, Miss Brown. I see you still have your maiden name. Sarah paused. I went back to my maiden name after my divorce. Got rid of the husband, got rid of the name. Have we met before? She asked, extending her hand. I attended the convent of the Sacred Heart, as I know you did also, he replied as he shook her hand. Oh, her breath caught. She looked at him, the heat rising in her neck. He was well dressed, as all her clients were. They had to have money if they were to engage her services. Please have a seat, Mr. Montgomery. Please call me Tom. All right, Tom. What can I do for you? I presume you're here to ask about divorce proceedings. No, actually, I'm here about our school days. Well, that was a long time ago, and I don't really remember you, so I'm not sure what there is to discuss. Tom looked down at his hands, picking at the skin around his thumb. I don't really know where to start or what to say exactly, other than it has taken me many years to make a decision to engage a lawyer. And I remember hearing some time ago that you had become a criminal trial lawyer, and he looked up but couldn't continue. The look of pain on his face shot into Sarah's chest. I'm sorry, Tom. I no longer practice criminal law, she swallowed. I redirected my practice some years ago. I'm now a family lawyer, specializing in divorce, but I could recommend another lawyer who might be able to help you. As soon as he had walked in the door, Sarah knew this was not going to be a run-of-the-mill case. Something in her knew she would be challenged. She felt ghosts being unleashed. Of course, Tom would come to her. Everyone in the school knew her story, and that's what they all thought it was, a story, a made-up, vicious lie. But no, perhaps not everyone, not Tom. She tried to place him. So much of that time she had blocked out, except the parts that she couldn't, that insisted their way unbidden into the present moment in the most inconvenient times, as if there ever could be a convenient time. At this point in her life, Sarah no longer felt the burning in her body, the foul fingers of the priest. But as Tom sat across from her in her office, her breath stopped and her legs trembled. She studied his face. Behind the intervening years, she could see the innocent boy he would have been that would have caught Father Finnegan's eye. I've come to you, as of course I know what happened to you back then. And of course, everyone knew about Teddy. I'm sorry about what happened to him. I mean, after. Well, I mean all of it, he stammered. Sarah just looked at him. I can't help you, Tom, she said. But you're a lawyer. You can help me. As I mentioned, I don't practice criminal law anymore. Oh. They sat in silence, Sarah looking at her pen, Tom looking at the carpet. Oh, he said again quietly. They sat some more. Sarah felt the sweat forming under her breasts. She wanted to cry, but this was not the time or the place. I can talk to some of my colleagues, she said quietly. Thank you, Tom said, looking up at her, tears in his eyes. I can't stay silent any longer. I need to file charges against Father Finnegan. I understand, she said. It's a brave thing you're doing. It won't be easy. I figured that, he said. You were very brave back then, so young, and you spoke up. It has taken me all this time. That doesn't matter, she said. You're speaking up now. Tom stood and handed over his business card. Here's where you can reach me. Anytime. Sarah took the card. What is your work, Tom? I've built up a construction business. I didn't have the stomach for more schooling after all that. So I took to working with my hands. Okay, Tom, I can't promise anything, but I'll see what I can do. After she shook his hand and showed him out, Sara returned to her desk. She had partitioned off so many pieces of herself and packed them into heavy boxes, labeled and put them on the shelf of her past. All the lost nights drowned in a sea of alcohol, all the parties jacked up on coke, all the screams of fury, all the tears of loneliness. She had planned to never wipe the dust off those boxes, preferring to leave them sealed in the vault of history. But when she uttered the words, "I can talk to some of my former colleagues," the shelving that held those memories collapsed. And Teddy, she had never been able to bury him, try as she might. This she would do for Teddy. Sara had had no contact with the school, had asked to be removed from the alumni mailing list. She didn't even know if Father Finnegan was still alive. Father O'Driscoll must surely be dead by now, the bastard. He was in the same category as Father Finnegan as far as Sara was concerned, for letting it continue, for passing him on to some other unwitting establishment, as he had been passed on to them. How many children? How many boys? How many girls? It made her stomach turn. Why? Why had no one believed her? And what if all this was dredged up again and still no one believed her or Tom? Sara called her assistant. "Emma, I'm going to write an ad. I want you to place it in all the major newspapers across the country. And get Donna Simpson on the phone for me." "Yes, ma'am," came the reply. Let's find out, she thought. Let's see how many might come forward. Sara felt a surge of adrenaline. She could do this. Let's take the motherfuckers down. Thank you. Thank you. So I am introducing Linda Castronovo. She lives and writes in Hadley, the ancestral home of the Norwottuck and Nonotuck people. With her sister, Elizabeth, she writes for and edits the online journal Starry, Starry Kite. She is in the final stages of completing her debut memoir about how she learned to love and be loved in midlife.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Dory and Writers in Progress. This is just an excerpt. I don't think it needs any introduction. It's a slightly different tone than what you've already heard. I was a boy-crazy teenager, but still never pictured myself married with children. "I'll be a good auntie," I told my siblings. When I came out as a lesbian just after college, my reluctance made sense. I pictured my nieces and nephews on summer vacation with me on my farm. But the biological clock is real, and it means business. At 32, my thoughts turned to baby, baby, baby. In the grocery store checkout line, a tow-headed toddler peered at the world from his mother's embrace, a tiny thumb secure in his mouth while the other arm draped around the back of her neck like a living scarf. On the street, a quiet kid squatted with her mom. Heads touch as they lean in close to examine a flower growing through a crack in the sidewalk. On a run through the park, a young mother and her 3-year-old snacked on a bench. When an engine backfired, the child wriggled closer, looked to her mom for reassurance. Everywhere I noticed the automatic, unconscious reach of a smaller hand for a bigger one, the way they fit together. It was the easy intimacy of it, the obvious comfort provided by joined hands, the connection, the mutual trust. I wanted that too. I wasn't alone. Friends talked about sperm donors and commitment ceremonies. I tracked my periods and ovulation. I knew exactly when I was fertile each month. We talked about it, dreamed about it, brainstormed possible donors, researched sperm banks and artificial insemination. When Jen was accepted to a local residency and we knew we would stay in the area, I turned up the pressure as my clock ticked louder and louder. I cajoled, I begged. When stretchy mucus signaled fertility, I got moody. I could be getting pregnant today, I whined from bed as Jen got dressed for work. We have time, she told me over her shoulder. There's no hurry. But it felt urgent. I would turn 35 in a few months and be considered a high-risk pregnancy. I read about the surge of lesbian moms and spent the first days of my period in a fit of tears. When friends finally got pregnant after 2 years, Jen consented. The theoretical was suddenly practical, and we faced real decisions. The cost of frozen sperm was high, rates of conception were low. Women inseminated for months and spent thousands of dollars without success. We didn't have that kind of money. Who could we ask to donate sperm? Jen's brother? We ruled it out very quickly. It would be weird if your uncle was also your father. It couldn't be a family member. Someone from school? Maybe. We asked Stu, a math teacher who was kind and funny and smart. He was flattered and said yes, but we backed out when he suggested we all sit down to talk about how the three of us would parent together. No, thank you, we told him. We want this baby to be our baby. I worried it would never happen. Could I even get pregnant? My cycles were reliable at 25 days, with obvious signs of ovulation at day 11 or 12. I was feeling desperate when Tori sat down in front of me just before the start of weekly convocation in the school gymnasium. She taught history and lived with her lawyer husband and their 2 young sons in one of the faculty apartments on campus. They were a handsome, healthy family, tall and athletic. I remembered that Matt had been a 3-sport athlete at Yale. Hey, Tori. I leaned toward her ear before I gave it a second thought. My voice was low and steady. Do you think Matt would ever consider donating sperm? I don't know, she said. Why don't you ask him? Her tone was breezy, casual. Well, that was easy. The program started in the next minute, and afterwards we dispersed to our classes. No time for any further discussion. I called the next day, strained to keep my voice even while my stomach churned. Matt answered the phone. Had they talked about this? My words came out in a rush. I don't know if Tori spoke with you, but Jen and I want to start a family. We're wondering if you'd be our sperm donor. Sure. His tone was as breezy as Tori's. When are we talking about? Whoa, okay. Just a minute, let me grab my calendar. It was Tuesday, day 8 of my cycle. Well, actually, how about Friday? School was heading into spring break, and Jen and I were leaving that night for a ski trip with her family. It would be our only chance until next month. Sounds good. I'll come by after work. 6 o'clock, okay? I got off the phone, breathless, and paged Jen. He said yes. Friday. Can you believe it? She offered familiar cautions and warnings. That's too soon. We should wait. What's the hurry? Aren't we leaving for Aspen that night? It's just the beginning, I said. 3 days later, and right on time, Matt knocked on our door. I was jittery as I let him in. What do you say to someone who has agreed to help you make a baby? He dropped his briefcase at the door, and I took his coat as if he'd come for dinner. Thanks for coming, I said, and we giggled at my pun. What was he thinking on the drive here? Would we have to make small talk? We left a glass jar on the counter in the bathroom for you. Okay, he said without the slightest discomfort. This shouldn't take long, and he slipped into the bathroom with a soft click of the door. We looked at each other and stifled nervous laughter. Jen shrugged her shoulders and raised her eyebrows as if to say, what do we do now? I took her hand as we sat on the couch. Matt opened the door and poked his head out. Any chance I can get some lotion? I flinched. Sure. Too quickly, I ran past him to retrieve a bottle of lotion from the bedroom. I couldn't make eye contact when I passed it to him, my mind full of images. We should have thought of that, I whispered when I rejoined Jen on the couch. Who knew? She whispered back, and we collapsed into silent giggles. In a matter of minutes, he came out of the bathroom, picked up his coat, and headed straight for the front door. I got up to follow him out. Thank you. No problem, he said, and reached for his briefcase. He paused as he opened the door. He looked stern. Just remember, his tone was serious. This, he said, this never happened. Thank you. So it is my pleasure to introduce Don Lesser, who has been writing as long as he can remember. In college, he switched from a pottery major to English because he could use words better than paintbrushes. He never looked back. He received his MFA in fiction from UMass in 1981. Since then, he has written dozens of technical manuals and corporate training materials. From 1996 to 2003, he wrote food articles and restaurant reviews for the Daily Hampshire Gazette and Edible Pioneer Valley. He is currently semi-retired and working on his third novel. Don Lesser.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Dory and Emily. Dory, if for some reason the voice is not coming through well, just let me know in chat and I'll turn off my face because you don't think you really need to see me when I read. What I'm going to read is from the novel I'm currently working on. The novel's tentatively titled Passing into History. It tells the story of Stephen Bennett trying to find out the truth about the death of Susie Carpenter, a young woman who may or may not have been his daughter. The novel is fiction. The characters and the plot are all invented. A number of incidents, however, actually happened, though to different people and in different ways. I've stolen them shamelessly and repurposed them for the book. This section is the opening of the book, so except for the book jacket blurb, you wouldn't need to know anything about what was happening. Chapter 1, On That Morning. On that morning, Stephen Bennett stopped off at Paradise Coffee. The barista, a slender, tattooed woman with many piercings, handed him the cup with a thin smile. There was a foam heart drawn on it, a private joke from a past coffee. He had passed her a note 6 months back, dental surgery, can't talk, 12-ounce cafe au lait, and received it with the same thin smile and a foam heart. As always, he left $2 in the tip jar. He put in the sugar and stirred, listening to the conversations around him. 2 women he recognized talking about a third who wasn't good with patience. Some guy on a cell phone talking way louder than he thought he was. 2 guys he didn't know talking about someone else. Stephen caught the tail end of their conversation as he snapped the lid on his coffee and got ready to leave. Coke slut, maybe, one was saying, but junkie, no way. The other made some kind of noise like assent, though it was clear he didn't know the person in question. Stephen pushed the door open and went out into the street. They say that in New England, no one tells you where something is, only what used to be there. He'd been in this town for over 30 years, and he walked up the street, seeing what was there overlaid on what had been there before. Past the lumberyard where he'd gotten the shelves for his office. Past the lawyer's office, whose daughter had been mean to his stepdaughter Elizabeth in middle school. Past the old railroad depot, now a reception venue. Past the social service agency that had been a restaurant until the second generation mismanaged it and had to sell. And then around the corner to his office. It was too nice to go inside, so he walked on, thinking to get a pastry. He walked down Main Street, early June, best month of the summer. The season just barely begun, the air warm and sweet smelling, not yet blisteringly hot and sticky. He looked across the street and down the block to the new police station and was startled to see Richards being escorted inside. He'd known Richards Carpenter, a poet who taught at Chapin College, as long as he'd been in town. Stephen couldn't imagine why he'd be at the police station. He crossed the street and walked down the block. The cop, he noticed, was someone who'd gone out with Elizabeth once or twice in high school. Everyone called him Brady. Elizabeth said he was a decent guy, but too straight-laced for her. No surprise he'd become a cop. Richards disappeared inside, and Brady started walking to his car. Stephen waved. Brady looked up. Mr. Bennett, how's Elizabeth? She's good. Was that Richards Carpenter going into the station? Brady nodded. He just identified the body. They need to take a statement. The body? Madeline? Blood rushing in his ears, sharp fear shooting up from his stomach. No, the daughter. The fear exploded and his skin hurt, sweat running down his back. Susie? Suzanne? Brady nodded. Does Madeline know? She does, he said. That's right, you're close to the family. You got to tell me what happened. I shouldn't really be talking with you. Brady leaned closer. They found her this morning at a motel in North Enfield. Overdose. The others were gone. Pictures floated through his mind. A tiny girl, dwarfed by her overcoat, walking just down the street from where they stood. The bartender at the bar further down Main Street, purple hair and the plaid shirt she borrowed from him and never returned. Wiping the bar with a professional smile before she put the beer down in front of him. The argument. Skin still electric. Overdose? That's not right. Whose name was on the register? Brady looked at Stephen, a cop now and no longer a friend. I've got to go, Mr. Bennett. Tell Elizabeth hello for me. Stephen looked around, alone now in the street. The air was still warm and sweet, the sky still blue, the clouds still fluffy balls of cotton. The people on the street all seemed to know, glancing at him as they hurried by. The picture of her smiling at him from under that floppy hat at a summer party. He hurried back to his office so that he wouldn't cry in the street. Instead, he found his car and drove to Madeline's without really thinking. She was sitting on her porch on the glider, staring across the street. A dark-haired Renaissance beauty, a little more gray in her temple, in her hair maybe. She was wearing old clothes and a paint-spotted smock. She must have been working when they told her, he thought, wondering if it was Brady or someone else. She looked at him impassively as he walked up her steps. He was going to hug her, but everything in her posture said to back off. So he sat beside her on the glider and said nothing as they rocked slightly. After a long while, he touched her knee. She jumped. They killed my baby. I don't think it was intentional, he said, not really knowing. They killed her. Madeline, I'm so sorry. You loved her. You have to help me. Find out who did it. Okay, he said automatically, not really knowing how. Her nose was running and she wiped it with her arm. Her orgasms had been trembling and silent as well. She lay in his arm for a bit, then startled, put her head on the pillow. He tried to put his arm around her now, but she pushed him away. If you don't want to help, fine, then go. Madeline. She pushed him again. She died alone. The other people, they drugged her and then they left her to die naked in that stupid room. Her shoulders heaving, cries torn out of her. She never cried. Not when she left Richards, not when she told Stephen she was pregnant, not when she told him it was over. He held her now and she let him. Okay, he said, I'll find out, I promise. Go, she said, go. He stood up, kissed the top of her head, and walked down the steps. He drove back to town, his own eyes blurry and his skin still electric and hollow. Windows open, a loud bang on the street startled him, and he turned, remembering the sound of her book bag, filled it seemed with everything she owned, hitting the floor as she plopped on the couch in his office. And now, a dead girl in a motel bed. He wiped his nose and parked near the police station. A quiet rage replaced everything else. I will find you and I will fuck you up. He left the car without putting anything in the parking meter. Okay. Yeah, it's hard without audio feedback on this. It's my pleasure now to introduce Sara Barry. Sara has been a freelance writer for 25 years, writing for educational publishers, healthcare organizations, and online businesses. When she's not putting together words for other people, she writes mostly memoir and personal essays. She's published parenting articles about seasonal activities and published the essay, Loss and the Stories That Connect Us. She's also been a regular blogger for Empty Arms Bereavement Support. Her work draws deeply on the rhythms of the seasons, what's growing or blooming or going into her canning pot, and how to hold love and loss and hope together. Sara grew up in Rockport, Mass, and misses the ocean, but loves the hills and trails and her community here in Western Mass. She lives with her husband and 2 daughters in Haydenville. Her son, Henry, died as a baby. His life and that loss are at the heart of her memoir. Sara?
Thanks, Don. My son Henry was born in May 2007 and died in December of that year. The first part of my memoir covers his birth, his short, intense life, and his death. And this selection takes place just a few months after he died. The visitation. Henry had already slipped from life, but his life was slipping away from me. I was so afraid of losing what little I had. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, the image of Henry's body had come back to me, puffy and white. In the half dream, he grew paler and puffier, creases forming around his ankles and elbows and wrists. He took on the look of the Michelin Man. I woke with this image and can no longer picture what Henry actually looked like. I had to stumble down the stairs in the dark, look at photo after photo. There he is, broad forehead, pale brows, impish grin, and eyes intent and curious. I could feel his hair spare and fine and soft under my finger, hear the happy babble from his open mouth, hear the wail from his screwed up red face. I looked at the pictures of him until my heart rate slowed and his image was properly seared in my mind. What if one day I could not remember what he looked like, sounded like, felt like? Could I really forget? What would I do if he did? Another night, when the light was returning slowly, but the night still felt deep and long, I had stayed up later than I should have, reading stories online. I was looking for connection, looking for people who got it, moms who were missing somebody like I was, somebody they loved deeply and unconditionally, somebody they barely knew. I stayed up late that night because as much as I talked and wrote and cried, as much as I felt the weight of grief every moment, I managed to hold sorrow back just enough to get through the day. But when I turned out the light and my body started to shut down, my meager defenses went down too, and the hurt welled up bigger than before. Every night I stalled. I didn't want to drown in that wave of grief, didn't want to fight tears for breath, didn't want the heaviness holding me down in the dark. Every night I hoped I'd get to bed so tired that I'd just fall asleep and skip that stage. Every night I failed. Till late one night, alone in the dark, quiet house, with Brian at work, no baby crying to be fed or changed, no baby sleeping quietly to check on, not even an oxygen monitor keeping me on alert. I climbed into bed, wrapped myself in the yellow blanket my Nana had knit for Henry, the one we had wrapped him in the last time we held him. And as the grief washed over me, I sang to him. Your name is Henry, your mama loves you. Your name is Henry, your daddy loves you. I sang out loud to drown out the silence. I sang to hear the words outside my own head. My voice cracked and tears spilled out. Even as my body shook, even as the snot filled my nose, I kept singing. Yes, we do. We really do. We love our Henry. I sang the litany of people who loved him, parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins and neighbors and friends. I sang the same list I had sung to him in the NICU and at home while we waited for his surgery and in the CICU and on the cardiac floor in Boston. I sang the same words I sang to him in the PICU as his spirit left his body, the words I had sung to hold on to him just a little longer, even as I tried to tell him it was time to go. In the dark and quiet of that night, with nobody there to hear, I sang that love, and he came to me. I felt his warmth and weight on my chest as he snuggled into me. I felt myself calm down the way I had when he snuggled on my chest in the mornings on the couch. I felt my body release, felt my breath even out and deepen, just as it had on those sunny days when we would laze together. His oxygen levels topping off, his heart rate settling down, the monitor ceasing to beep. He settled with me that night like he had all those mornings, and we fell into rhythm together. I felt the weight of his body, belly down, butt in the air, there on my chest. I felt the weight of missing him and the chest constrictions of grief slip off me, just as the anxiety had when we breathed together. My tears faded away. He stayed there, warm, comfortable heft on my chest as we drifted into sleep. In the morning, I woke to the daily coming to and remembering again that he was gone. And he was gone, but he had come to me, not a dream, not a ghost, a warm bundle of love cozied up on my chest, as real as light-filled mornings we had had together in June and July. In some moments, his death was so present with me. Standing by his hospital bed, in those last moments with his foot in my hand, the dead weight of him wrapped in that yellow blanket, his lifeless body in a star-covered jacket at the funeral home. But other moments I'd wonder, did this really happen? I'd look at pictures of him and think, do I really have a baby who died? But the worst moments were the ones when I wondered, did I really have a baby? Did he really live? I looked at the pictures, watched the videos, tried to hold on to these pieces of my baby, my son, my life. Some moments I'd look at the pictures and they were just two-dimensional images, no life to them, no connection. Not me, not Brian, not Henry. Just people with a stroller in a garden, a dad shading his son's sleeping face at a 4th of July parade, a mom feeding her baby in a green King rocker. But the night he came to me, I felt him warm on my chest, my hand resting lightly on his back. He came and we breathed together. He was real. And now, last but not least, Rita. At 19, Rita Bleiman left her hometown of Dallas for DC in order to work for the FBI. She quit that job a week later and eventually ended up in the offices of Walter F. Mondale and then later the Carter administration. At 28, in a bold turn, she ran off to Europe a day after she married her husband, whom she had known for 4 months. Ultimately, they ended up in Northampton, where she attended the Ada Comstock Scholars Program at Smith College, and where she first began to write. Since then, she's written 10 plays, 2 of which won awards and 2 of which were published in anthologies of regional playwrights. She's also been published in the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, and the My Turn column in Newsweek, as well as several small journals. She'll be reading a short piece from her latest novel, which is currently entitled Jackie's Promise. It's the 3rd in a series.
Hi, my novel takes place in between 1973 and 74 during the Nixon administration. Watergate was gearing up, Vietnam was gearing down, and the Supreme Court, ironically, had just approved the abortion rights bill. My narrator's name is Gloria Warren. She's a secretary for a Senate committee chaired by Senator Thatcher Reed. Her friend Nancy is the senator's personal secretary. Nancy called to say the senator had left, so she'd be over to pick me up in 15 minutes. You want to go someplace for a quick drink? I asked as I stepped into the car. There's a pub across the street from where I live. Actually, I prefer to talk in the car. She avoided looking at me. Oh, okay. She parked on C Street, a little past my apartment, cut the ignition, turned towards me and hesitated for quite a while. How's Dan? I asked to get the ball rolling. He's fine. We're trying to save to buy a house. In the district? No, we could never afford that. Probably in Maryland, possibly Silver Spring. We sat quietly long enough that I began to worry she was going to drop a depressing bombshell on me. I wanted to ask you, she faced me. I hope you won't think I'm horrible. How could I think that? I wanted to ask you if I could sometimes use your apartment. What? I paused to process her words. You mean if you need a place to crash because you have to work late, or no, I mean during the lunch hour. I cocked my head and squinted. I'm having an affair, she blurted out. And it's hard, you know, we're both known to a lot of people. We're both married, so you want a place to have sex? We need a place to be together. We can't even talk without people noticing. Is he from the office? No, do you think I'm a terrible person? If you feel like you don't want to be a part of this, I'll understand. Of course you can use my apartment. I'm just surprised. Actually, I was unsettled by this request, and I'm not sure why. I'm very broad-minded about sex, particularly as it relates to women. But for some reason, the second I agreed to this, I regretted it. It was as if someone whispered in my ear, this will end badly, and not just for the involved couple. Thanks, you're a true friend, she said, as she had trouble looking at me. It's none of my business, of course, but are you unhappy? No, I love Dan. It's just we've been together since high school, junior high, actually. He's the only, she examined her hands for a second. It's just a fling, sure. At least for me, I'm not sure about Ty. Ty? You can't tell anyone, promise. She scooted towards me, her eyes glowing. Ty Phillips, do you know him? No, should I? He's a legislative aide for Senator Griggs. Isn't Griggs on your committee? Griggs, I made a putrid face. Yeah, he's a pain in the ass, right-wing, racist, crabby. Ty's not like that. Hasn't he attended some of your hearings? If he did, I never met him. You'd know him if you'd seen him. He's dreamy. I tried not to roll my eyes. Well, anyway, Ty is very unhappy. Feels he was trapped. She gave me a knowing, empathetic glance. Shotgun wedding. I'll bring the keys tomorrow, I said as I opened the car door and stepped outside. What I didn't say was how much it galled me that so many men felt they should be canonized because they did the right thing and married the girl they knocked up, trapped, as if their dick got caught in some surprising contraption. Of course, they always had and frequently used the divorce remedy to extricate themselves. But those women, those conniving bitches who tricked them into marriage, they are the trapped. For 20 years or so, raising his kids against astronomical odds as a single mother. Nancy was on cloud nine that dreamy Ty showed an interest in her. It would be easy for me to warn her that she was being irresponsible, that the risks were too great, that there was too much to lose. But I was not unsympathetic. I like men and I like sex. The fact that both can be disappointing has never diminished my enthusiasm. Consequently, I feel that every person should have a romantic experience like that to look back on, even if, as is often the case, the Disney fairy tale beginning could end in the Grimm brothers' nightmare. I had considered myself a feminist as early as junior high, though I didn't know what to call it. To be honest, in the early 60s, the concept of equal pay or advanced degrees was not in my consciousness. My own mother was very happily married. She worked as a sales clerk in a department store, on her feet all day long. Then she came home, cooked dinner, cleaned up, did the laundry, and went to bed by 9. This was not what happily ever after was supposed to be. As far as I could see, the second a woman married, options dwindled. But that was our destiny. The most we could hope for was a kind, financially secure spouse who wouldn't beat us and would only cheat occasionally. We weren't even given permission to sow our wild oats like the guys were encouraged to do. As a young girl, I heard over and over again that there were two kinds of women, wives and whores. And if we did get married and our husbands berated us, abused us, cheated on us, or divorced us, it was our fault for letting ourselves go, for becoming boring, for not taking care of their needs, for nagging. The permissible future for females looked grim. In 7th grade, during one of our health classes, after the boys and girls were separated, Sister Felicitas passed around an Oreo cookie. She told us we could do whatever we wanted with the cookie except eat it. You could take it apart, run your finger over the icing, carve your name in it, spit on it, whatever. Once it made the rounds, Sister said, "Now, would any of you want to eat this?" We all shrieked in horror, and Sister said, "That's how men feel about easy women." Interestingly, when the boys returned, Sam White snagged that cookie off Sister's desk and ate it. So there you go. As I made my way up the street to my apartment building, my stomach knotted. There was, of course, no way to get out of my arrangement with Nancy now. And I kicked myself for not stalling, for not saying I had to think it over first, for not giving myself a chance to come up with a rational excuse or possible alternative. But I've always had trouble refusing friends, particularly friends like Nancy, who never ask for anything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita. That was amazing. I guess we're going to move to question and answer, short question and answer period at this point. So I'm so proud of these writers. I just want to say, and the work that everybody has done over this past year has been intense and tremendous. So congratulations to all 6 of you on your accomplishments in this group and for these beautiful readings, which showcase just how much you have done. So yay. So this is a time for questions to the writers about process or about their stories. And also, if anybody in the audience has questions about the manuscript group or what the process was like, you know, if you want to know something in particular, you can type it into the chat bar now, and we will try to get to everybody's. So I just want to start with some writing process questions for people that the audience typed while you guys were reading. Jane, one of the ones that you got several times was comments about how polished your dialogue sounds, and wondering if it took you many drafts to get to that level of refinement.
That's funny. Thank you. Actually, it kind of came out that way. I didn't take much out of that scene or add anything to it. Yeah, so I don't know. It just kind of happened. Luckily, so I'm glad it worked.
You're lucky if that just comes out that way. That's pretty amazing. And I just wanted to ask you, because I know of your background in, you know, theater and movie work and voice, and how much do you think that informs your ability to write your characters' voices?
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way, but maybe that is part of what, you know, working with words like that and scripts and yeah, maybe I'm used to a certain kind of economy and subtext within it. I don't know, but yeah, I'd never thought of it that way.
Because scripts are all dialogue, right?
Yeah,
So it seems like reading a lot of scripts might help to make someone a good dialogue writer, right?
that makes sense for sure.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you.
Marie, somebody asked about your use of tense and how you decided to use the present tense in your piece. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken, but I think it switches partway through, like when you get to the really intense part, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How did you make the choice
How
to
did
do
I-
that? It was very effective.
Well, it just felt more immediate to have the scene be in the present tense and then do the backstory. I wasn't sure, like there was a point where I thought, ooh, maybe I should have had the past perfect tense for this one or something. I wasn't sure how confusing it would be, but it seemed that's why I chose the present tense.
It really worked.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it was very immediate. And I noticed that the details were so visceral. Several people remarked that they felt like they were right there.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Sarah, several people were blown away by your story, and several people wanted to know, how it was to write about something so difficult and emotionally challenging, and whether it helped to write it down. Did it kind of aid the healing process in any way?
I have been writing this story since it was happening. Journaling, keeping a care page, blogging after that, as part of a community of baby loss moms. And I'm a writer. And so when I was writing and I was doing prompts and I was in groups, it's what kept coming up. It's how I process what's happening in my life, what's happening in the world. And so it didn't feel hard to go back into it. It just felt like how I worked through things. And some of it surprises me, when it comes up. This particular scene first came up actually in one of our Jumpstart groups at the studio, and there was something in a prompt that just kind of triggered this memory that I hadn't intended to write about. And then it came out.
It's really, really powerful, incredibly powerful writing. And I imagine, cathartic for anyone who reads it who might have gone through a similar loss too. Speaking of real life, Dawn, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, I love your admission in your intro about shamelessly stealing from real life events and in order to create this fiction. And I'm wondering sort of how that process worked for you. Did you hear about the events that you were in, and did that spur the story idea in your mind? Or what is the process for you of writing about things that have actually happened?
Basically, I need to have my people do things. You can't just have disembodied characters talking to each other, in space. So I'll start thinking of what they could be doing, and I'll often, not always, but often, something that either happened to me or someone I know would come up, and I could sort of basically take the outlines of that and turn that into the story.
Mm.
It's about as close as I can picture.
Love that. Does anything help you to sort of get into the emotional space of that, the sort of intensity that your characters are feeling? I mean, having not experienced it, it's not like you have instant access to that. Do you have to kind of put yourself in a similar situation from your past, or how do you do that?
No, I just start writing. If I'm lucky, by the end of the first paragraph, I'm there. And then if I'm not, I just keep writing anyway.
Great. Good job. Linda, your narrative voice is also so natural and engaging. And a bunch of people commented on that in the chat, like just how this voice is so propulsive and it sounds so authentic. And I think, part of writing a good memoir is finding that voice that sounds real, that sounds authentic, that sounds compelling, and that invites the reader in. So did it take you a while to find that voice for your book, or did it just sort of come out the way you think and speak?
That's a good question. I don't know. I wrote most of the first draft in present tense and in second person. And so it seemed to be a way to get the story out with more detail. Like I had enough remove as this doing the second person, and yet I was there in the scene in present tense. And it's been in changing it back and forth to past tense to first person. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I did it, but I've made a lot of changes, lots and lots of changes.
Great. I know you're on your fourth draft right now, right? Is that?
Yes.
And you churned out several of those drafts in this past year.
Well, the hardest part was getting the first draft down. And, I just sort of embraced the idea of a big, messy, chaotic first draft. And the second draft took a long time. Well, it took months, I should say. But then now it's picking up speed. I'm actually working on the fourth and the fifth one at the same time because I have different readers reading it and giving feedback. And so I'm moving things around. It's a little crazy making, but also incredibly fun, like putting a puzzle together.
That's a good way to describe it. I love that. Rita, somebody just asked a really great question for you. First of all, I just want to ask, how are you so damn funny? Like, I know you probably can't tell us how to be that funny, but like, I'm always in awe of writers that can do humor. And I'm wondering if that just comes naturally to you, or do you have to work at being funny?
No, I don't have to work at being funny. I have to work at not being inappropriate all the time. So, inappropriateness is often funny. So both of my parents were very funny. So I just grew up in a household where people were always making smart remarks and whatever.
That's lucky for the rest of us. And somebody else wanted to know if your character Gloria ever gets away from you and does things that you're not anticipating. Are you always in control of her?
Well, I have to think about that. Yeah, I think occasionally it goes off in a direction I hadn't planned. Yeah, she does. Yeah.
Seems like she would. It seems like she's the kind of character who would rebel against her author and get into trouble that you're not even planning for her. It's really great stuff. A couple more questions. This is for the memoirists in the group. You know, what's the biggest challenge about writing about people who are in your life? Like, how do you navigate that tension? Anybody want to jump in? Sarah, Marie, Linda?
Well, I choose very carefully which members of my family that I send invitations to. So like tonight, I think there might have been 2 siblings that I know would have been okay with whatever I wrote, and others who are not. So, and yeah, it's tough. And I really sometimes would love to try writing fiction instead, but yeah, it's tough.
What about you, Linda?
Well, I change names and certain identifying details to protect people's privacy. And in some cases, I send the sections that are about those people, just so if they want some to weigh in on what it should or shouldn't say. But basically, it's my story, right? Their version of the story would be different. Everybody, I mean, when I send things to my sister, we often talk about how we remember things differently. So everybody's take on even the same events in the same family are slightly different, which is why everybody has a story, right?
Right. You can only tell your own, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Another question was, people want to know about writer's process because we're all stymied, I think, by our own lack of discipline. So how do other people do it? Like, do any of you have a writing schedule, a ritual, like times that you write every day that you stick to? Like, does anybody want to speak to that in the group?
Well, it's why I said at the beginning, I'm just so grateful that it's the unexpected gift of COVID that you guys went online, because I don't tend to write when I'm at home. And I usually write when I'm away, like on a writing retreat or something, and I would stay longer so that I could keep writing, which makes for not a lot of writing in the year. But so I wish I was more disciplined. I'm hoping that having done these 10-week sessions over and over and over again with you and Emily, that maybe I'm in a bit of a rhythm now, so that if it stops, I can at least keep going. But I've always been really amazed and impressed by people who go, okay, 9 to 12 every day, or Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or whatever. I don't have that self-discipline.
That's encouraging to know.
And I can write anytime someone else is writing with me. Like, I am a total team sport player, and I could set up a schedule for myself. I do like writing between 2 and 4 in the afternoon because it gives me enough time to do other things beforehand. But what works best of all is setting a date and having a partner who's going to sit down. You know, I'm pretty good at parallel play. I'm not the solo do it on your own kind of writer at all.
What about you, Sarah?
Mine has changed. I feel like it comes and goes in cycles. When my daughter was younger, I would drop her off at preschool, and I gave myself half an hour before I started doing my work that I was getting paid for, and would do, my other writing. In this group, the deadlines really kind of drove me to sit down and do the work regularly. I tend to respond well to deadlines in general, so that was helpful. And I like to write earlier in the day. If I do it earlier rather than later, I'm more likely to not let other things get in the way, and my head is fresher. I have been working in a space where I try to have my other people's writing at one desk and my own writing at another desk, just to have that separation for myself, since it's all on the same computer.
That's great. So separation of space, writing with others, deadlines, I'm hearing, being a group. Anybody else want to add to that list?
Yeah.
Don?
Yeah, well, I mean, for too many years, I was a professional tech writer. And so basically, I didn't have the opportunity to have a writer's block because I had to write, I had to produce, and if I didn't get paid and I didn't get to do it again.
Mhm.
So that gave me a lot of discipline, I think.
Mhm.
And, like Sarah, I respond really well to deadlines. And also in writing this book, the first couple of drafts just came in waves. I'd work really heavily for a couple of months and then put it down and sporadically.
Mhm.
And now I'm sort of doing the same thing. I'm working intensely, but in short bursts. So it constantly changes.
And what about you, Rita?
Well, after I wrote my first book and it was being sent around by my agent, I quit writing altogether for 6 years when I was on the city council. And while I was on, this is in reference to the humor thing, while I was on the city council, I was constantly censoring myself because I was so worried I was going to say something totally inappropriate during a televised meeting. So I just censored myself. And then after I got off the city council, I started writing again. And my writing was so flat and so not funny. And it took me a very long time to get that back. So that was interesting. Yeah.
That makes so much sense. So there aren't a lot of questions in the chat bar about the manuscript group, but I just want to give people a sense of what it is and what the process that these writers have been through. So it is a year-long program, and they had deadlines every 6 weeks or so. So every 6 weeks or so, everybody turned in about 40 to 43 pages of writing. And this was one of those groups where almost everybody met every deadline and turned in the maximum number of pages. People were really prolific in this group. And then we all had 2 weeks to read everybody's installments and make some notes. And then at the end of that 2 weeks, most of the time, 5 times out of 7 deadlines, we met in person, well, on Zoom. And on a Friday evening and Saturday for about 2/3 of the day, we met, and each person got almost a full hour of discussion about their pages. And then we'd have a break, and then we'd come back and do the next person's. We'd do 2 on Friday night, and then the next morning we would do 4 more on Saturday with a lunch break in the middle. There's usually a craft component on the Saturday workshop, a craft lesson, and some handouts and things geared towards where people are in their process. And then 2 of those deadlines, we actually just emailed each other comments and feedback rather than meeting. As well, everybody met with me several times over the course of the year individually to just kind of brainstorm and address challenges and talk about the big picture and what is this thing I'm writing, and what's the shape, and to bat ideas around about the bigger picture of what people were writing. And the goal being by the end of the year you have a draft, like a 300-page draft. And as I said, I think everybody in this group did that, which was pretty remarkable. I mean, that's happened before, but sometimes not everyone makes it to the finish line. And in this group, not only did everyone make it to the finish line, but they started their rewrites and got pretty far into it. So it was a great, impressive, disciplined group. Does anyone want to talk to, the pace of it? I mean, for anyone that might be curious about that breakneck pace. Was it helpful? I mean, is it hard? What would you say to someone who's curious about that?
I found it manageable. At first I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? But I got into a rhythm with it over the different, 7 times. And I really liked it. I liked having the time to get a piece together. And as others have said, I work better to a deadline, of course. And then, of course, getting the feedback was so helpful. I don't know, all of it. I liked all of it, I've got to say. And it was intense. And I by the end of the year, I realized I kind of came up for air at the end of the year, but I didn't realize that I was treading water like crazy but it didn't feel that way at the time. It just felt like after a year, wow, that was a lot.
Yeah.
And I was really grateful for it.
Thank you, Jane.
I found it was really helpful to get the feedback from everybody, but it was equally helpful to critique other people's work, not because we're helping them, but because it would be helping me to read somebody else's stuff with a critical eye, because so often what they would do that was maybe something that should be corrected was something I did all the time that needed to be corrected. And it brought that home to me. So I found the critiquing part of it just as valuable to me as a writer as it hopefully might have been to the person I'm doing. So.
Yeah.
I also want to say, I really like being able to work on a piece and really polish it and then turn it in, rather than write it at the moment and have somebody read it and have to respond. Because often it gives me, if it's good writing, it makes me think of things. And then if someone's reading it, I come back 5 minutes later and I've missed all of it. Whereas if I'm reading it, I can just pick up where I left off. And as far as the pace goes, I felt like if you were a serious writer, then it was a good pace. If you sort of just thought you wanted to screw around with writing, maybe, and maybe not, then it was too much. But if you were serious, it was a good balance between too fast and not fast enough.
It felt like a motivating amount of time to get that set of pages together. And the other thing that was really helpful, I think, was seeing people's work and getting feedback on my own work over the long term, and kind of seeing because these are longer works, I've been in a lot of groups where we read short pieces and I get feedback on those. And where I was coming into this group was knowing that I needed to figure out how those pieces started to fit together, how the big story worked, and having people kind of comment on that as well as on the individual scenes or selections.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think one of the big purposes of what we do in the year is to try to get the feeling for each person's story and what the arc is and where they're going with it and what the shape is turning out to be, and to help one another with that bigger picture. So there's more information if anybody in the audience is interested in finding out more about the group. I will be leading another one starting in September. Emily put a link in the chat bar to the manuscript group page, and there's more information. The deadline for applications is June 15th, so coming up in just a little less than a month. And the details are all there. But thank you all so much for being here, and thank you so much to these incredibly wonderful readers and accomplished writers. It's been such a fun year with you all. I've been so invested in your stories, and I can't wait to see them between covers. So woo, you did it. I wish we could eat cake together.
Thanks, Dory. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
You all.
Beautiful readings.